Hey everybody, Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share a quick comparison between the Sony Alpha A6000 on the left and the Sony NEX-6 on the right. Now the A6000 won't ship until mid-April of 2014, but the NEX-6 has been around the block for quite some time now. After all, the A6000 is the NEX-6's successor, so we expect good things considering the NEX-6 set a very high bar for performance at a relatively affordable price point in the mirrorless game. Both have aps-c sensors. The NEX-6 based around a 16 megapixel sensor. The brand new A6000 has a 24 megapixel sensor. Both have hybrid autofocus systems based around a combination of phase and contrast detection. However, one of the key enhancements to the brand new A6000 is that it has a vast advantage when it comes to the number of actual points of focus. Only, I believe, 97 points of phase detection on the sensor for the NEX-6, as opposed to 179 for the A6000. So almost completely covering the entire sensor, which when it comes to continuous autofocus on moving subjects will make a world of difference. Also, the general autofocus performance is best in industry now on the A6000. The NEX-6 is capable of achieving 10 frames per second, definitely no slouch when it comes to autofocus, but the A6000 sets a new standard for mirrorless and much of the industry overall. That 11 frames per second is impressive, under a sixth of a second, I believe, to gain autofocus on anything is what Sony is quoting. And again, just because of the far more advanced development of the sensor, that Bion's X processor that isn't in the NEX-6, which is a great improvement also for low light capability for the A6000. A big concern for a lot of people when they saw that a 24 megapixel sensor was going to be inside this camera, like the NEX-7, which many people avoided because of lesser performance when it came to low light situations, despite the higher pixel density and greater detail. There are also issues to consider that many already are aware of when it comes to lens pairings, and that's something they took into account, they being Sony, when putting together this camera as well. So a lot more optimization, a lot more maturity, a lot more understanding of their own mirrorless business. And even though I don't have this camera in my hand, it all makes perfect logical sense that they've accommodated for the extra pixels, as well as take into account flexibility with lenses in a way that they simply couldn't with the NEX-7, because the NEX-7 was the flagship, the baseline for performance. And unfortunately, right now there are rumors that there will not be a successor to the NEX-7. And based on the specifications of the A6000, clearly it isn't a replacement for the 7. So if that's the case, that'll be an unfortunate issue. And I can understand why that would be. It seems that Sony has reserved the $1,000 and up price point for their full-frame mirrorless offerings now, the A7 and A7R, which will, of course, also go down in price like everything else in this world. And that's part of why I'm comparing these two cameras today, even without physically having the A6000. So I've talked about the sensor. I've talked about the actual focusing capability. Wi-Fi here, Wi-Fi and NFC with the A6000. If you have NFC, that will allow you to more easily activate remote control on a smartphone or tablet and use that to control your ISO, shutter speed, aperture, as if you were using the camera in your hands, or just use it for framing a family group photo. It's really a very versatile application that's also matured. Both cameras also have access to Sony's Play Memory application store, where you can download free as well as pay applications that will just take the cameras to new heights. So on that foot, they are even, because both just have access. In terms of the build quality and design, there have been some clear changes, even though they're still very similar. You can see the front of the grip looks almost exactly the same, but the design of the body is really reminiscent, or I should say, almost a direct replica of what we have with the A7. And that applies to the grip too. The grip from the A7, definitely something that grew out of the grip from the NEX-6, but it's lower on the actual body, not part of the actual molding of the body like it is on the NEX-6. It appears the A6000 still has a little bit of that slope coming off of the top of the frame, but definitely lends itself more to the A7 and A7R design, where the grip is a component on its own, essentially. Unfortunately, no dial like found on the A7 here on the A6000, and that's part of Sony reminding you, if you're looking for that sort of control along with quality, you have to step up to another tier. But uniformity in terms of the color also, you've got a black shutter button now. Here we had silver. The multi-interface shoe, which is on both cameras, is now black on the A6000. Unfortunately, it was silver here. That wasn't a big deal, but Sony realized these are things that should have matched the camera body. But that's pretty much it in terms of the front layout. Also, they changed the actual top molding. There's a bit of a, it tapers off here, a little bit of a slant. It seems that now it again emulates the A7 in its exact design here of being far more angular. So that's pretty much it on the front end. By the way, in terms of pricing, something I left out altogether, the kit you're looking at here on the left, $799.99, when the NEX-6 launched with the exact same 16 to 50 power zoom lens for the E-mount, of course, which is what both cameras are based around, which has also developed exceptionally well through the course of Sony's lineage here, or since the inception of the NEX brand, which is now the part of the Alpha brand. Basically, this was a $1,000 kit. So you're getting arguably a lot more camera here in the A6000 for a lot less money. And that's in large part to do with Sony's research, I think, with marketing. I think that's why the NEX-6 was such a success, was because of its price point. The NEX-7, I think, made a lot of people feel like they could be looking at other options, or quite frankly, the NEX-6. Other options being other manufacturers, but the NEX-6 undercut the 7, delivered better low-light performance, better flexibility with legacy glass. The 7 struggled with some wide-angle problems, among others. So there were things to address, and they did a lot of that here with the A6000. And that's what makes this a compelling offering, besides the fact that it's at a lower price point. That unfortunately did also, that lower price point, come at the expense of some cost cutting. The OLED viewfinder on the back of the camera, which I may as well flip over to at this point, as well as on the 6000, which kind of protrudes here is built into the body. On the A6000, it protrudes, which you'll see in a moment when I do a close-up of that. The back button layout also has changed. I'll be taking you through that as well. The side door for HDMI out and USB access, micro USB for charging and transfer, is exactly the same, but now with the A6000 you do have the ability to get clean HDMI out, which is a big advantage if you desire it. Let's go ahead and take a look. The side is what I was just showing you, and again you can see it's pretty much identical. I don't have the power zoom here to show you that, but pretty much the same. Nothing really changed there. The plastics and build quality may have changed, and that's what I'm anticipating. I'm hoping that Sony made something that was even more substantial at a lower price point, although that's unreasonable to really expect. Let's see if we can get the top of the camera. We'll get to the back, don't worry. In terms of the top of the layout of buttons and the overall finish, things have changed pretty drastically. This definitely looks a lot more like the A7. I'll bring that over again. And you can see immediately that the A7, there's more of the NEX-7 mixed with the A7 than the NEX-6, in my opinion, is even involved in the design of this camera. Sony has been wise to pull the things that work from their respective camera models and incorporate them across different lines, because what works, works, frankly. But again, the viewfinder, you can see now a cleaner look, I would say, arguably, than what you get with the 6. The 6, it's literally as if you can see the viewfinder unfinished built into it, but with the 6000, much cleaner look. It actually looks like it's part of the camera. This is me being extraordinarily critical, but these are the design differences from one generation to the next. As I mentioned, the multi-interface shoe, we now have something uniform. The flash, different only in that, again, the design of the top of the camera is completely different, and that's because, in part, it's taking on also a new design that emulates the tri-nav from the NEX-7, but clearly doesn't emulate its functionality. They've literally just taken, they being Sony, the mode dial and moved it to the left of this thumb dial that was buried underneath it. So that's pretty much what they've done in terms of to give you a little bit more flexibility, and maybe they realized that tri-nav was popular and could be adopted. Maybe it was a cost move. I have no idea. Whatever it was, to me it looks like a good move compared to the stacked button arrangement we had here. Function button was here. The power button and shutter as well, silver, now black, and they've also changed the actual shutter button. They've been going for that look, a more polished look, frankly, and less point-and-shoot look on all of their interchangeable lens cameras, as well as high-end RX cameras, and I don't blame them. Pretty much covers the top of the camera. Let's move to the back that I told you we were going to look at earlier, and that's probably one of the biggest areas of change. I mean, the whole body has changed, no question. Let's go ahead and flip this over, and I'll bring this up first so you can get a quick study of my fingerprints and the actual layout of buttons. You can see we have the proximity sensor right there for the electronic viewfinder. As I mentioned before, over 2 million here, 1 million here, but Sony, again, saying that they've improved the quality enough that it matches or exceeds it. The screen resolution, exactly the same. So same performance, same range of motion when it comes to an articulating arm capability that it has, which is nice for flexibility and composing shots, no question. Same exact mode ring here, or not mode ring, or programmable ring here on the A6000, and you'll find that on every Sony camera. And the grip style has even fundamentally changed, as you may have noticed. Here we've got a grip that wraps around the body. See if I can get this to format properly. There we go. Wraps around the body here, and instead more room for buttons on the A6000. So Sony, I'm assuming, listening to consumer feedback. We've got a programmable C2 here. Function button's been relocated. Playback button is there now. These were both customizable. I mean, just a complete change. The flash button has stayed in the same place, but now the play button is now the menu button. So some similarities. The video button pretty much in the same location, but it seems like they've moved it down a little bit. Again, just doing more research, and they look like they've also made it so that when you hold the NEX-6, you could just hit it in this fashion. It looks like they've created a little bit more of a lip on the A6000 to prevent even more accidental presses. Not that I heard anyone really complain about the location of the record button on the NEX-6. Beyond that, I don't think there's a whole lot more to show when it comes to differences in the actual body. I still just expect really good things from this camera because, again, it's replacing the NEX-6, and the NEX-6 is arguably Sony's most popular, most successful NEX or mirrorless aps-c offering to date. And the E-mount, in terms of the lens offerings, really has grown in a fantastic fashion, in my opinion. And now that we're getting some full-frame E-mount lenses, it's clear that Sony is 100% invested in the E-mount succeeding. Again, another front-end shot of this camera, and you can see just a clear change in the design of the entire piece of equipment. One of the key differences that I haven't touched on, and I'm going to now, and it's really the most important, is that autofocus system. I mentioned it earlier. It's just so fundamentally important if it actually ends up working, that there's no way that I would ever recommend the NEX-6 even at a $200, even a $300 savings, unless you are completely restrained by budget, in the event that this autofocus system that's promised by Sony in the A6000 really does live up to its potential. Because between the autofocus speed and the intelligence due to the greatly increased number of sensors, you do legitimately have a different photographic tool than the NEX-6 fundamentally. Yes, they both have aps-c sensors, and they aren't that far apart in megapixel count, but everything else about them is inherently different, from design to even, as I mentioned, the HDMI out is clean on the A6000. No clean HDMI out on the NEX-6. Now, with all of that said, the NEX-6 is still an incredible value. Right now, you can pick up the body alone for around $600 or $650, and that changes on a day-to-day basis. And I'm sure with the launch of this camera, we're going to see that pricing change as well. Battery life, I'm not sure that there's any significant difference here. The Bion's X processor is inside the A6000, which is beneficial in many ways. I'm not sure what effect that will have on battery life, but if other cameras like the RX10 are any indication, it should be a good thing. If the A7 or A7R are an indication, then battery life will have dropped off with the A6000. Overall, I think you're looking at a very solid piece of equipment here, a fantastic offering that just builds upon the success of the NEX-6. That's what its specifications speak to. That's what the software also speaks to. I didn't mention that. We no longer, as we would with the NEX-6 or other older NEX models, will be dealing with the consumer-friendly, I will say, point-and-shoot interface with pictures rather than getting traditional Pro-style menus, which is what you'll find on the A6000, much like on the A7, A7R, RX10, RX1, RX100, and A-mount cameras. So a real menu system for what is, I think now Sony understands, a legitimate option for digital SLRs, and that's why they've given it an autofocus system and sensor that match and best most digital SLRs in its aps-c class. So a very compelling offering here. I like everything that I see. In terms of which one is going to be better for you, I think it's all going to come down to budget. A lot of people hoped that audio monitoring and input would be brought to the NEX-6. Sony basically answers that by saying you've got the multi-interface shoe for external microphone attachments and XLR if you want to go crazy. It's not a great answer, but that is the answer. I would have liked to have seen weatherproofing on this camera, but that is again reserved for a more expensive niche than what the A6000 or the NEX-6 for that matter represented, at least in terms of Sony's eyes. But overall, these are very similar cameras, but if that autofocus system pans out, they'll become dissimilar. That's to say the least. But again, the NEX-6 still will be one of the better cameras out there. I mean, I can't imagine anyone that would shun an NEX-6 body for, $400 or $500. That would be a great value, and that's presuming that the A6000 is able to hold its retail value for a substantially long time, which will be interesting to see as well, because keep in mind, this will be discounted like everything else, and it'll just be an even better value. And if the only corner that was really cut was, downgrading the resolution, the number of the dot count on the electronic viewfinder, the OLED, then that's not really a big corner to cut. So overall, I hope you all enjoyed this comparison. I hope it helped clear up exactly what is different between the original NEX-6 and its successor, the A6000, which is now part of the Alpha brand, with the redefining of Sony's digital imaging arms, CyberShot and Alpha for interchangeable, CyberShot strictly point and shoot. And clearly, these are both great cameras. I think that any customer will be happy with, but if you're already spoiled with the NEX-6, you probably are going to want to get that new autofocus system in your hands, especially since it looks like there may, as I've mentioned, be no new A7000. I still think that's all a matter of whether or not Sony just decides to do it at some point. But again, hope this helped. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. And of course, as usual, please feel free to subscribe. Later.